What's going on, guys? Welcome back to another video. So today we're just going to be going over some race day updates, get you guys all up to speed on everything you might need to know. We're going back to the West Coast on the 250 class, and it's already round 11, so we're kind of entering the home stretch here. But anyways, I'm just going to go over everything you might need to know, get you guys back up to speed on where the 250 class is, as well as some of the weather conditions, track conditions, and that kind of stuff. So let's get into it. All right, so as I mentioned, we are going back to the 250 West class this weekend. Now, I did do a specific video breaking down that class and getting you guys back up to speed on it in a little more detail, but we're just going to kind of touch on it real quick. So in first place, we got Levi Kitchen. He's your points leader. He's only 4 points ahead of Jordan Smith and then 5 points ahead of RJ Hampshire. So those guys are going to be duking it out. Now, in fourth is Garrett Marchbanks. He's kind of isolated. He's pretty far back off of those three, but he's also got a pretty big gap over fifth place, which is Joe Shimoda. And then I'm just going to read everyone else off in the top 10. You got Oldenburg in 6th, Bourdon in 7th, Julian Beaumer in 8th, Mumford in 9th, Yoder in 10th, and then also Nate Thrasher in 11th after crashing out of the last round that they did in Glendale. Now, the good news is regarding Nate Thrasher is he's going to be back this week. He could potentially get in there and mix it up for the win. Obviously, he's already won one race this year, so look for him to be a potential spoiler. Shimoda could also be a spoiler. Now, weather could potentially be an issue. It looks like it rained off and on all through Friday night. Now, they did have most of the track covered. They left, I think, the start straight uncovered. But as far as the rhythm lanes and jumps and all that, they did cover that. They did cancel press day, which I mentioned in my other video that I figured they probably would. Obviously, the riders were still there and they were talked to, but there was no riding, which I think was great. I do kind of expect them to cancel free practice. So we'll have to see if they limit them to one qualifying session, I guess you would say, one timed qualifying, or if they allow them to do both, or if they actually just go ahead and do all three sessions with the free practice as well. Now, I am pretty concerned about the conditions of the dirt, regardless of whether or not it stops raining in time for them to not have be rained on while they're on the track or not, because, you know, Seattle's dirt already breaks down a lot, and the fact that there's a lot of moisture, even with it being covered going down through the night and, you know, even leading up to the race, there's going to be a lot of moisture on the track in the transitions. And that's assuming that it stops raining before they pull the tarps off, which there's a good chance that might not even happen. So I don't necessarily look to it to be a full-on mud slop fest like we saw in San Francisco, but I do think it's going to be worse than San Diego. So that's my prediction. Going to have to see how the track breaks down, but I do think it's going to be hard to pass. And I do think it's going to be hard to keep it on two wheels, especially if you're pushing the limits. As of right now, it looks like the rain's supposed to let up by 1 p.m. local time. I know we have seen a lot of wet races this year, and I would like to see some more dry racing. But whatever the case may be this weekend, I just hope there's a good race. I hope that these guys can be competitive and that there's passing, which I do think there's a potential to that. Also, one more thing worth noting about the track is they did tame down the whoops. They did turn the triple into a double, and they did do some other things preemptively, knowing that there's a high probability that there's going to be weather issues and that the track is probably going to be hard. So they already preemptively built the track, scaled back. Okay, so moving on to the 450 class. Obviously, we have Jet. He's out in front. He's starting to stretch it out. Cooper is still within a reasonable distance. He's only 21 points back. And then Chase is a full race back. He's 25 points back. Actually, now we have Ken Roxon in 4th and Eli Tomac in 5th. They're only 1 point apart from each other, but they're 35 points back and 36 points back, respectively. So they are way back in the points. After what we saw last year, they're definitely not out of it, but realistically, having all three of those guys go down and out of the championship in front of them is very unlikely, and the chance of that happening 2 years in a row, extremely unlikely. So I look to this to be more of like a 3-horse race for the final stretch here. But realistically, I don't even know if Chase's heart is really in it. They're really struggling with that KTM. He's changing the internals on his forks. He's making all kinds of big changes. While Cooper Webb, he's changed one clicker since Anaheim, and that's it. So Webb is seeming a lot more comfortable and locked in. And I think he still believes he could win this championship, whereas Chase, even though he's within the same distance in the points, I don't really think that he believes truly deep down in his heart that he's in contention for this championship. Neither one of those guys seems like they're going to get Jet with all-out speed, but I do look to Cooper to be extremely aggressive with Jet, not necessarily to put him on the ground intentionally, but more aggressive than he would be with any other competitor. Kind of like what we saw with him and Tomac last year when Webb went out for the season, how he came off the line and he was already riding really well that day, and then he kind of ran it in on Tomac just a bit. Nothing crazy, but he was like, hey, I'm here. And obviously, we had that whole incident where he washed the front and then Cianciarulo hit his head, and then that was it for Webb. However, I look to him to be having that kind of an attitude towards Jet if he ever comes across him on the track, that he's just going to cut him absolutely no slack and try to get in his head that way, because I think he knows that in a speed versus speed race, he's probably going to lose. He's really not that far off, but he needs to be consistently beating Jet week in and week out, or he needs to make up a ton of points in one race, like Jet almost DNFs or finishes outside the top 10 when Cooper wins. And I think he knows that, but I also think he believes he's capable of that. So we'll have to keep an eye on those two. I think if Jet comes to try to pass Cooper in a main event especially, it's going to be really interesting to see how that happens. But Jet already kind of knows with Cooper he's going to have to watch where he puts himself. He learned that in Glendale when Cooper saw him next to him in the main event, and then he just completely rode him off the side of the track. Obviously, it wasn't a race-breaking deal. Jet still got up to third, but I think you could argue that he would have gotten better than third if it wasn't for that incident. Whatever the case may be, the point I'm trying to make is I think it's going to come down to Webb versus Lawrence, and even at that, I don't know that it's going to be that much of a battle, but I just think that there's a possibility that Cooper might try to do something to make it interesting, and we have a potentially wet race coming up here, which could just shake up things just a little bit. So hopefully we can have some good racing and it'll be something to talk about after this weekend. Last thing I want to go over real quick is just kind of a quick update on injuries. So Benny Bloss, he's going to be out with a collarbone injury that he suffered last weekend. Obviously Craig is still out. Ferrandis is still out. Sounds like he's going to be back next weekend. Justin Hill is still out from being landed on back in Daytona. Carnow, we all saw what happened to him. He's going to be out. And then John Short, unfortunately, he's also going to be out after last weekend where he suffered just a bad crash. So hopefully he'll be back soon. Now moving on to the 250 class. So as I mentioned earlier, Nate Thrasher, he's going to be back. Also, we're getting back Lux Turner, who is returning after a bad crash in Anaheim. Unfortunately, Voland, he's still out. And then Dylan Walsh, he's also returning after a bad crash in Anaheim. So with that, that's going to go ahead and do it for this race day update video for round 11 in Seattle. Hope you guys enjoyed and hope it was helpful. Hope you learned something you didn't already know. That being said, feel free to subscribe. Also, feel free to follow us on Instagram at Moto Fever Media. We keep everything updated throughout the week on there as well. Really appreciate everyone who's coming alongside as I start to grow this channel and media platform. Everyone do your best to stay safe out there, and I will see you in the next video.